Okay. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to have Mr. Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us each week to give us a brief rundown of the top events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your questions. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Afnaf, and good evening from Israel. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the possible threats to the Netanyahu-led government, especially as we enter the last couple of weeks of the Knesset session and ahead of his fourth speech to the joint Houses of Congress next Wednesday. I think it's even going to be around this time, a little bit earlier. The first major threat is the issue of the ultra-Orthodox, specifically around the so-called enlistment law or the enlistment issues. We've talked about that in the past, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but suffice to say that as of Sunday, the Defense Ministry has indicated that it will be sending out enlistment papers to thousands of ultra-Orthodox men in Israel. Up until this date, as we know, there has never been such a thing, or at least not on such a large scale. The question is exactly who they're going to be. We've heard for many years that the ultra-Orthodox say that they can or should not serve because they are learning. There are those in the government, including apparently Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who has taken this into consideration and has allegedly, hasn't been confirmed obviously, but allegedly looked at National Insurance Institute records to figure out who was not learning full-time and who is actually working by looking at taxes paid. He's looking to enlist those who are around 25 years old. Now, on the plus side, perhaps behind the scenes, even though major ultra-Orthodox rabbis are saying that no one should serve, regardless if they're learning or not, and even tonight, one of the leaders of the Shas, religious leaders of the Shas party, said even the sort of bums, as called shababnikim in Hebrew, those who are not learning, not really working, are sort of in the margins of ultra-Orthodox society, even they shouldn't be enlisted. But it could be that, you know, those who are working will be less of a problem for the ultra-Orthodox world, who feels the need that anyone who wants to learn should be able to do so and should not go to the army. Now, this has been attacked by some people as being a ridiculous plan, because you're now taking out those who are actually contributing taxes and working, exactly what many critics of the ultra-Orthodox community say we need to see more of. So now these are the people you're going after to take out of the workforce, to stop paying their taxes, to go to the army, and they're probably married, maybe even have children. You should be enlisting the 18-year-olds just like you do for every other sector of society. So there's a bit of a disagreement over exactly what is the best strategy at this point. We are going to see on Sunday, or at least have some idea. Interestingly enough, when there was a debate in the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset, led by its chair, Yuli Edelstein, who's trying to work on this law to try and come to some sort of agreement or consensus, and there's marathon talks at that committee over the next few days. When the IDF representatives came to the committee, they were asked straight out, who are these people you're going to be sending to enlistment on Sunday, and how many are there? And they were not able to tell. So that has obviously been quite a lot of fodder for the ultra-Orthodox, who say it's more about getting headlines. They don't even have a plan. It's not sure exactly who's going to go. Only days before these enlistment papers, these first initial enlistment papers, are supposed to be sent out. Now, the reason 4,000 has been chosen is because that is what the IDF said when asked how many ultra-Orthodox they're able to incorporate in the army. Obviously, the ultra-Orthodox community has special needs, they have special kosher, they need to be separate from women, and a few other things. They need to be able to pray, etc. So there, it's not possible for them to just enlist tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox all in one go. The interesting thing about this is the Shas party, the representative of the Sephardi ultra-Orthodox, who are more amenable to these type of things. A lot of their supporters do go to the army. In fact, some of their leaders have actually served in the army, even if the next generation will not serve in the army. Interesting, they've taken a more militant line than the Ashkenazi rabbis. And the reason probably is because the ones that are being targeted, those who are out working, are probably not from the Ashkenazi society, which puts far less of an emphasis on working, and probably more from the Sephardi Mizrahi development areas, whether Netivot or Fakim, where there's a large Sephardi Mizrahi ultra-Orthodox community. So they probably feel the pressure more than others. But interestingly enough, Shas has taken a very maximalist point of view, whether it's their rabbis, their political leadership, or the media that they control themselves. Interestingly, in this whole sort of debate is that while this could prove to be a threat to the government, we have not yet heard, or at least certainly not recently, any major voices in the ultra-Orthodox political class saying that they are going to leave the government immediately on this. In fact, there was even a Shas minister who went on radio today and said, we will not leave this government, and certainly not over this issue. Moving on to the second issue, and it's opposed to the first one in the fact that this is an issue which leaders of the interested parties have said that they could leave the government, and that is over the possible hostage deal. Negotiations are ongoing. The Prime Minister sent the latest team to Cairo to try and hammer out some of the details. But we have heard open threats from Bezalel Smotrich of the Religious Zionist Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir of the Otzma Yehudit Party, the two right-wing sort of national religious leaders who both said that the deal will be unacceptable, the deal that's being reported, the deal that's out in the media, the deal that President Biden said the Israelis accepted. This would be a major problem for both of them. The negotiations themselves, apparently there are two major outstanding issues, which again have been pored over and argued back and forth. The two major issues at this point, or let's say the two major strategic issues at this point, because there are many other details that need to be worked out, are, first of all, who's going to control the Philadelphia corridor? As we know, the Philadelphia corridor is that thin slice of land that separates Gaza from Egypt, and that has been an extremely important strategic point. The Israeli army that's gone into Rafah in recent weeks has taken control of that corridor and has found dozens of tunnels that lead from Gaza into Egypt, and that has been the real oxygen for Hamas to get their armaments in, to get their people in and out, to get cars in, to get goods in, whatever it is. And the fact that Israel's taken it over probably points to part of the reason why Hamas seemed to be a little bit more amenable. Up until that operation, Hamas had basically taken a maximalist point, and Netanyahu has touted the fact that Hamas are now ready to talk, ready to sit at the table, and have made concessions, especially on the all-important issue that Israel does not have to sign up ahead of the negotiations or at the beginning of the negotiations to end the war permanently before any hostages are released. The fact that they brought that back has given those like Netanyahu the feeling that the military push into Rafah, into the Philadelphia corridor, and some other developments, which I'll talk about a little bit later, have paid off, and that's why Hamas are more amenable. The interesting thing is the security establishment led by Mossad, led by Army Intelligence and others, have said that they could find a way around the Philadelphia corridor issue, and the other the outstanding issue is whether the return of Gazans to the north will be facilitated by Israel, and which will ensure that no gunmen, no Hamas members or other Islamist terrorist personnel will return to the north. That's something that Netanyahu is very strong on. Hamas want an undisturbed movement up north. Obviously, they want to get their people back in positions of control. The north of Gaza was where they held many of their important HQs, military infrastructure, etc. And they want very much to go back and take control. Israel does not want that, obviously. But again, we hear the security establishment saying that we can deal with these issues. At the moment, the most important thing is to get the hostages out. There was a release by the Hostages Families Forum this week of pictures of 5 of the young girls, the lookouts, which have become one of the big sort of issues and really tugging at the heartstrings. And you saw them badly bruised with fear in their eyes. And that has also moved quite a lot of people in Israel, and seemingly also leaders of the security establishment as well. The interesting thing is there appears to be some cracks within Likud on the hostage deal. There are those like ministers Gila Gamliel and Miri Regev, who are saying that we should accept this hostage deal. We need to move it forward as soon as possible. As I said, there are others, more hawkish views, who are absolutely against it. What does seem to be happening is Netanyahu understands that Hamas are hurting, Hamas are under threat, Hamas are on their knees, depending how you look at it. And that's the reason they're coming to the table. So he's trying to get as better deal as possible. Some are saying that he's dragging his feet. He would argue that this is just the way to negotiate. You negotiate from strength. And he points to the fact that Hamas have moved away from some of its maximalist positions as Israel's plowed through certain areas of Gaza. Most importantly, this week was the possible assassination of Mohammed Deif. And if we know anything about Deif, while Sinwar is the head of Hamas in Gaza, Deif has this almost mythical aura around him as far as Palestinians. Whenever we hear chants, on behalf of the Palestinians, Deif is mentioned even more than Sinwar. He's escaped Israel's assassination attempts a number of times before, and he really does it. There's no real good updated pictures of him, or very few. People don't know where he is. He doesn't surface, he doesn't talk, he's not at these major events that Sinwar was at before October 7th. So the possible assassination of Deif would be absolutely important from a symbolic point of view. The reason I said it's for sure that he was assassinated, Israeli media and journalists were shown the video of Israel's assassination attempt. It was in an area where some of the senior Gaza brigade leaders were meeting, and there was very strong intelligence that he was meeting at that point. The video footage showed people go in, but none of them came out. So there is a very optimistic feeling in Israel that he has been assassinated. It's probably something that can't be proven, at least not immediately. Obviously, Hamas have denied it and say he's sitting somewhere laughing at them. He is not coming out. He's not showing his face. He didn't show his face even before October 7th. So for a while, this is just going to be a he said, she said. But it does seem, according to evidence, that there is a very strong likelihood that Mohammed Deif, a very, very senior member of Hamas, was assassinated this week. Other potential challenges to Netanyahu as he goes off to the US Congress and to meet with President Biden next week are the possibility, or let's say that there's certainly the challenge and the call for a state commission of inquiry. Netanyahu has said that everything will be looked into and investigated, but only after the war. The second thing which is clear is he doesn't want the highest level of state commission inquiry, because that would be completely independent and has legal powers to call for people's resignation. What it seems to be is at the moment, if that was something that was passed, it would be in the purview of the Supreme Court, the chair of the Supreme Court, who would be able to choose the person to lead that. And it seems like the most favored or most likely is the former Supreme Court Chair, Esther Hayut, who was certainly not a big fan of Netanyahu. So that's something he fears. And there is talk that he can try and change the law ahead of any state commission of inquiry to balance it more in his favor. But certainly the cries for a state commission of inquiry are becoming louder by the day. Finally, we saw today, it was put out purposely to the media, a meeting between Avigdor Lieberman of the Israel Beitenu party and former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett has already said that he's returning to politics, and there has been a lot of chatter about forming some sort of larger right-wing party. The names that have been put out is Lieberman, Bennett, perhaps Saar, and even Yossi Cohen in the past. Yossi Cohen has since said he's not returning to politics. He's given some excuses, but probably largely because he will be blamed, at least in part, for October 7th. Also, he's been named in a separate controversy, which is called the submarine affair. So probably at this point, he's sitting out. Also, he would not be anything probably north of number 3 on such a list. But the big question is who would lead such a list? Both of them were at pains, or at least sort of behind the scenes, were at pains to say that we are not going to be discussing any sort of formal merger and who's going to get what position until elections are called. Gideon Safir, who is struggling in the polls, has said that he will accept position number 3 on such a list, and it would certainly be a powerful opposition to Netanyahu. The fact that it was put out sends a very strong message that there is an alternative to Netanyahu on the right, and it seems to be gaining in polls. It seems to be polling every time it's put up for people during polls. It polls better than Likud under Netanyahu. So certainly it is another thing that's going to make him sweat over the coming weeks and coming months. So those are some of the challenges which Netanyahu faces, even as the summer Knesset session comes to an end. Netanyahu's off to the US next week, but still there's a lot for him to think about. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you for the update, Ashley. Now, moving back to the draft, in practical terms, does the IDF have the resources to absorb and train the hundreds or even thousands of reluctant draftees, many of whom may well prove to be disciplinary problems?
I mean, that's why it basically did an investigation into this. It was something that I think came from the top. It came from the defense minister and asked what, it's not necessarily what are the needs. The Israeli army needs a lot of soldiers because of those who were killed, those who were injured, possibly fighting on 2 or more fronts in the next, in the period ahead of us. But obviously, because of the unique needs of the ultra-Orthodox community, there's a limit to what they can do, especially as the first year. They already have enlisted around 1,800. So I think that the top number they said was around 4,800, 5,000. So they have the capacity for a few more thousands. Obviously, if they are ignored, which is the demand by the rabbinical leadership, that these enlistment papers will be ignored, then obviously could create problems. It will be very interesting to see how many of those who are given enlistment papers turn up to the enlistment center and go to the army. Probably it won't be very high because if they wanted to go to the army, they could have volunteered over the last 9 or so months. But it'll be interesting to see what happens after this standoff, because then there could be legal and even criminal matters that are related from this, and even financial sanctions on some of the, if they belong to certain learning institutions. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. It'll be very interesting. I don't think we'll get any answers on Sunday. I think this is a process that will take a little bit of time, at least. And it'll be interesting to see beyond the headlines, beyond the large, grandiose statements, how much the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical political leadership, how much noise it really makes. At the moment, as I said, they haven't said that they will topple the government over this issue, which I think also tells you something about it. It's an important issue for them, don't get me wrong. But whether they can stomach a few more thousand of their tens of thousands of from their community to go to the army, perhaps. But the idea is that that will steadily grow in the coming years, not just because there's a necessity for it, but also as the army gets more used to creating perhaps units, especially for ultra-Orthodox Israelis, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, actually, Jewish Israelis.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have some very recent new developments on the northern front with Hezbollah leader Saeed Nasrallah threatening, quote, if Israeli tanks come to Lebanon, they will not only have a shortage of tanks, but they will not have any tanks left. Do you think this is a feasible threat?
Well, I mean, Hassan Nasrallah likes to give these long-winded speeches on every occasion at the moment. There are quite a lot of Shiite Muslim festivals around, so there's lots of opportunities. And he also gives on any anniversary of something or any major assassination that Israel did. So he's giving these speeches, pretty much every few days. What it does show is, once again, that Hassan Nasrallah is a very strong purveyor of Israeli news, because there was talk about this shortage of tanks in a discussion whether there should be all-female tank units and whether they should be training them. And it came out that there's probably a shortage of tanks. Now, it could be there's just a shortage of tanks specifically for training purposes at this point. But clearly, Nasrallah had heard this, and that's where this statement came from. We hear these threats, but again, in the same speech, again and again and again, Nasrallah says, if the war in the south stops, if there's a ceasefire, if Hamas agree to it, then we will also agree to it unilaterally from our point of view, showing, again, he doesn't necessarily want a war, but he also has to show his, sort of strength and the rhetoric, etc. The fact is, even though there has been, I think today there was 100 missiles that came over from Hezbollah in response to IDF action over the border. Again, it's still within constraints. It's directed at Kiryat Shmona largely, which is a town, the largest town on the border or near the border, but it's been evacuated. So it's largely shooting at empty towns at this point. Nasrallah did say in this most recent speech that he could, if Israel carries on sort of upping the ante, it could start targeting areas that it had not in the past, which is a threat to go further south than it has up until this point. That's certainly not an empty threat. It could happen, but I still stand by the fact that I do not believe that Nasrallah wants a war. Again, there could be miscalculations, there could be directions coming from Tehran, but it does not seem that Nasrallah wants a wider war at this point.
Now, to follow up, as you mentioned, Nasrallah has threatened to target new villages in Israel, and that kind of came in response to a number of alleged civilian casualties in Lebanon. Now, we know that Hezbollah is a totally different animal from Hamas in terms of their military capabilities, but how much do they differ with regards to the way that they actually conduct warfare, considering that Hamas seems to do so in a way that's designed to maximize their own civilian casualties? Is Hezbollah's methodology similar?
I would say no. Hezbollah have greater concerns about the civilian population, primarily because it's also a political party. Now, Hamas is also a political party, but Hamas basically has ruled on its own the Gaza Strip since it threw Palestinian Authority or Fatah leaders off very high buildings in 2007. In Lebanon, they're just a very strong part of the political framework in Lebanon. And, Lebanon has always been split up into factions, whether it's Christian, Maronite, Druze, Shiite, and Sunni Muslims. And they have quite a lot of enemies in Lebanon. A lot of people would like to see them go away. They feel that they bring Lebanon on the brink of disaster, especially in its potential war with Israel. It's basically subservient to Tehran, Iranian interests. So it has a lot of enemies. So it has to take all of these things into consideration when it decides what to do vis-a-vis Israel. That's one of the reasons why I think Nasrallah doesn't want a war at this point, because he knows that, yes, they could do a lot of damage to Israel, but Israel could do a lot more damage to both Hezbollah and Lebanon itself, which probably can only dampen their image. Let's not forget, Lebanon is not necessarily, the strongest economy and the most liberal of countries in the world, but it's certainly not one of the least either. There is a good life in Lebanon. It was once called the Paris of the Middle East. There is a working economy. There is a nightlife. There is a cultural scene, tourism, etc. All of this will be hurt by another war between Israel and Hezbollah. So Nasrallah at this point takes all these things into consideration, especially with the political deadlock in Lebanese politics. And that's why they wouldn't necessarily seek the civilian damage that Hamas seek, and certainly works in their favor. It's a very different situation, as I said, because they are in a sovereign country with many moving parts, with a political sphere that is deadlocked but is very sensitive. And Hezbollah, as I said, there's a lot of leaders from other communities, whether they're Christian or even Sunni or even more moderate Lebanese leadership, who are basically saying, do not take us to the brink of disaster, because they remember Israel in the last war, the Second Lebanon War, and they certainly don't want to see that again.
Thank you. Now, moving on to the upcoming speech with Netanyahu in the US Congress. Can you please comment on the large number of people from the university faculties who've signed a petition for Netanyahu not to speak to Congress?
Yeah, I mean, all these petitions, however many people sign them, there's always, it's always a drop in the ocean, but it looks good for certain media to show. I don't know the number of people who have signed this, but, there are tens of thousands of academics, maybe even more, around the US. So it's always a little bit of drop in the ocean. And it doesn't surprise me, academia in the US has been a lot more radical than the general mood of the country. And it's always tilted very left. So it's unsurprising. It's not going to make any difference, certainly not at this point. Both the leader of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have jointly invited Netanyahu, even though the initiative certainly came from the Republican side. And there will be a meeting with President Biden. So it's not putting that in danger. It's more just for these signatories to get something off their chest. But again, it's unsurprising. There will be demonstrations when Netanyahu is over there. I'm sure there'll be lots of statements, etc., etc. But the majority of those in both houses of Congress will welcome him, will give him a warm welcome, not necessarily because they love the man, but because he represents the institution of the democratically elected leadership of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel. And I think that will win out. He won't get the warmest of reception, not like Zelensky did from Ukraine, but I think it will still be criticism within the House. Yes, there'll be some who will not come. Maybe there'll be one or two shouting from the gallery, but I think on the whole, there'll be a sensible and even warm reception from Netanyahu.
Okay, now we have a question from an anonymous attendee who asks, you say you don't think Nasrallah wants war, but hasn't Hezbollah gone too far at this point to avoid one?
No, I would say they haven't. They've been, as I said, they have ballistic missiles that can pretty much reach any inch of Israel. They could be sending these over to civilian centers, which Hamas have done regularly. Hamas never, to the best of my knowledge, have ever pinpointed or targeted military installations. They've always tried to create as much carnage and loss of life. Obviously, Iron Dome takes out a lot, and Israel has a very sophisticated system in houses where you have safe rooms, and Hamas's rocket capabilities are not that sophisticated. Hezbollah is extremely different. They have the capabilities. They have some serious weaponry, and if they really wanted to go to war, they would have used that by now. They could have targeted Tel Aviv. They could have targeted Haifa. They're sending over their drones to show that we know what there is in Haifa. We're watching, etc., etc. But the fact that they're bombing Kiryat Shmona, knowing that there's no one there, Mostly they are targeting military installations, whether in Sfat or on the Golan or elsewhere, shows that they do not want to up the ante at this point. They do not want to go beyond. Now, over the months, it certainly has moved. The line has moved on both sides, both from Israel's point of view and from Hezbollah's point of view. But still, Hezbollah haven't even used a small percentage of what they possibly can. I mean, they could throw over thousands of rockets a day, and they also know Israel can do a lot of damage on their side. So at the moment, Nasrallah is showing that he's fighting, showing that he's standing in solidarity with Hamas, but clearly he's not stepping over any major red line at this point. That could obviously change in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ashley. We have unfortunately come to the end of our podcast for this week. I want to thank you again for joining us. It's always a pleasure hearing from you.
Thank you.
And for our viewers and listeners, please join us this Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a special hour-long MEF panel on the Turkish occupation of Cyprus, 50 years on. We thank you all again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.